They told everyone I was the selfish one, the daughter who ruined the family. But the truth. They canceled my wedding because my sister woke up sad. I didn't fight. I didn't explain. I just disappeared. 2 weeks later, I was in Santorini saying my vows. And 6 months later, their perfect life came crashing down. I'm Lauren Hayes. And this is how silence turned into justice. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, don't forget to hit subscribe, smash like button, and tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. It was the kind of morning that should have felt perfect. The ocean light poured through the windows of our 2-story home in La Jolla, soft and gold. The kind of light that makes everything look like a dream. My wedding dress hung by the door, the satin catching a hint of the sun. Lavender petals were scattered across my vanity, and a playlist of soft acoustic songs played from my phone. For the first time in years, I thought maybe, just maybe, I could start my own life, and not the one my parents designed for me. I sat in front of the mirror, took a long breath, and tried to memorize my reflection. The calm before everything I'd worked for fell apart. Ethan's picture sat next to my makeup brush. He was smiling, eyes crinkled in the way that made me feel safe. The bedroom door burst open without a knock. My mother, Margaret Hayes, stepped in, her hair perfectly set, but her expression tense. Behind her came my sister Maddie, still in her pajamas, pink with tiny red hearts. Her mascara smeared her hair a tangled halo of chaos. "Lauren, honey." My mother's started voice, controlled, almost rehearsed. "We need to talk. I don't want you to get upset," turned slightly in my chair and smiled. "Mom, it's my wedding day. There's nothing that could upset me today." Maddie groaned loudly and threw herself onto my bed, the springs creaking under her weight. "I can't do this. I'm not in a good headspace. I didn't sleep all night. I feel awful." I frowned, still holding my makeup brush. "Are you sick?" She covered her face with a pillow. "No, just, I can't handle all these people, all that noise, everyone staring. It's too much." My mother rushed to her like Maddie was a wounded child. "Oh, sweetheart, what can we do? Do you need tea? Do you want me to cancel something?" Before I could even process the absurdity of that sentence, my father appeared in the doorway. Robert Hayes, gray-haired, pressed suit tie perfectly knotted, like a man heading to court. Not his daughter's wedding. His voice was firm, deliberate. "Lauren, we think it would be best to postpone the ceremony." I laughed. It slipped out a nervous, startled laugh. "Postpone." "Dad, that's not funny." He didn't laugh back. "I'm serious. Your sister isn't well enough for a big event today. We need to think of the family." For a second, I thought maybe I'd misheard. "I'm sorry because she's not in the mood." "You want to cancel my wedding because Maddie feels sad." My mother stood smoothing her blouse like she was preparing for a press statement. "It's not about her mood. It's about empathy, Lauren. No one can celebrate when someone in the family is suffering." Maddie pulled the pillow away and smirked. "Exactly. But of course you wouldn't understand. You only care about yourself." Something inside me snapped, not loudly, just a quiet break that I could feel in my chest. I put the brush down on the vanity slowly, carefully, like if I moved too fast, the whole illusion would shatter. "Mom," I said, trying to steady my voice, "this isn't about empathy. This is about you letting her control everything. Again." My father's expression hardened. "Watch your tone." I stood up. My hands were shaking, but my voice stayed low. My tone, "You're canceling my wedding because my sister didn't sleep well." "Enough, Lauren," he said. "We're not having this discussion. The decision's made." Maddie sat up, straight, her eyes glinting. Finally, someone said it. "I'm the only one who's honest around here." She gave a short laugh, sharp and satisfied. "Face it, Lauren. You've always tried to make everything about you. Maybe today isn't your day after all." The room spun slightly. For 29 years, I'd been the calm one, the reasonable one, the peacemaker. But right then, reason felt like a joke. My mother sighed, already reaching for her phone. "I'll call the caterer and tell them we're postponing." "It's for the best." I watched her fingers hover over the screen. The lavender on my vanity smelled suddenly too sweet, suffocating. I straightened my shoulders. "Don't bother. You won't have to cancel anything." My father frowned. "What are you talking about?" I looked at him, then at Maddie, sprawled on my bed like she owned the place. "If this family is so terrified of one bad mood ruining a wedding, then maybe I shouldn't be part of it." Maddie scoffed. "Oh, please. You'll be back in an hour begging for us to help you." I met her gaze. Not this time. I took one last look at the white dress hanging by the door. The sunlight caught the fabric, turning it into something almost unreal, beautiful, untouchable, wasted. My father tried again, his voice rising. "Lauren, don't make a scene." I smiled, small and tired. "No scene, Dad. Just a decision." I picked up my phone, my purse, the small travel bag I'd packed weeks ago with emergency items just in case. Maybe I'd known deep down that something like this would happen. I walked to the doorway. My mother's mouth opened as if to stop me, but no sound came out. My sister rolled her eyes. My father muttered my name once, stern and useless. The air in the hallway felt cooler, lighter. My heels clicked against the hardwood floor, echoing down the staircase. At the bottom, the faint smell of wedding flowers drifted in from the living room. Roses and eucalyptus that would never be used. Voiceover quiet and steady in my mind. For 31 years, I'd tried to earn their love. That morning, I realized I didn't need to. I opened the front door. The sunlight hit my face warm and blinding. Behind me, I could still hear the low murmur of their voices, disbelief turning into blame. I didn't turn around. I stepped outside, letting the door close softly behind me. The white dress stayed upstairs untouched, glowing in a room that no longer belonged to me. The sound of the suitcase wheels rolling across the hardwood floor was the only thing that filled the silence. My room felt smaller than ever, the air heavy with perfume and disappointment. I paused halfway to the door, caught by the framed family photo hanging above my dresser. Everyone in the picture was smiling. My father's proud grin. My mother's perfect posture, Maddie's arms thrown around them both. I was there too slightly behind half of my face, lost in the shadow. I stared at that photo for a long time before setting it face down on the dresser. Out of sight, out of memory. I pulled open the top drawer of my nightstand and found an old leather-bound notebook. The cover was worn, the corners bent from years of being shoved away and forgotten. I hadn't opened it in more than a decade, but my fingers seemed to know exactly where to find it. The first page was dated March 14th, 2002, my 10th birthday. I read the words written in blue ink, the handwriting shaky and uneven. Dad promised he'd be home for cake. He didn't come. Mom said he went to get Maddie's gift. I blew out my candles alone. The next entry was high school graduation 2010. Mom left the ceremony early. Maddie was crying because her feet hurt in her heels. I gave my speech to an empty row. Another page. Christmas 2010. Everyone's in the living room laughing. Maddie broke up with her boyfriend again. I'm cleaning up plates. I closed the notebook slowly. It wasn't just words. It was the pattern of my life. Every milestone of mine had been overshadowed by one of Maddie's meltdowns. Every proud moment I'd earned turned into another crisis for them to manage. For years, I told myself it didn't matter. That peace in the family was worth a little silence from me. But sitting there, suitcase half-packed, the truth felt louder than ever. I hadn't been keeping the peace. I'd been disappearing. My phone buzzed. The screen lit up with Ethan's name. "Hey," I said softly, pressing the phone to my ear. "Lauren." His voice was careful, steady. I heard from the planner. "Your mom called her. Are you okay?" I laughed, but it came out broken. "Define okay. I'm serious," he said. "Do you need me to come get you?" I looked around the room, at the pale walls, the half-open closet, the empty hanger where my dress had been. "No, you don't need to come here. I just need a minute to breathe." Ethan paused. I could hear cars in the background, maybe traffic near his apartment downtown. "We can still do this, you know. We can get married. It doesn't have to be here. We'll find somewhere beautiful. Somewhere that's just us." For a second, I couldn't speak. Then the words slipped out before I could think too hard. "Santorini." There was a small silence. Then his voice softened. "Santorini." "You remember," I said. "We talked about it once after that trip to the Greek restaurant. You said you wanted to see a sunset that turns the sea gold." He laughed quietly. "Yeah, I remember. The island with white houses and blue roofs. That's the one I said. I want the sound of waves instead of my mother's voice. I want salt air, not tension." "Then that's where we'll go," he said. "Don't worry about the rest. I'll take care of everything. Just get yourself there." For a moment, I felt something I hadn't felt all morning. "Hope, you're serious." "Dead serious," he said. We'll start our marriage on our own terms." When the call ended, I sat for a while staring at the blank wall ahead. Then I pulled a notepad toward me and wrote a single sentence I need air. "Don't call me." I placed the note on my nightstand right next to the turned-down photo frame. It felt symbolic, like a final punctuation mark on a story I was done reading. I folded a few clothes into the suitcase. Jeans, a jacket, a simple white dress that wasn't meant for a wedding, but could be if it needed to be. My hands moved quickly, almost like they'd been waiting for this moment for years. As the sun dipped lower, my room began to dim. The lavender from my vanity still lingered in the air, but it smelled different now. Less like calm, more like escape. By the time I zipped the suitcase, the sky outside had turned from orange to blue. I slipped on a light coat, picked up my bag, and opened the bedroom door one last time. The hallway was quiet. My parents' voices came faintly from downstairs, low and sharp. Maddie's laughter, fake and brittle, cut through for a moment, followed by the sound of my mother trying to soothe her. I tightened my grip on the suitcase handle and walked past my childhood room, the one still painted yellow, where Maddie's trophies lined the shelf. The air smelled like old carpet and forgotten dreams. At the front door, I hesitated only once. The family portrait still hung in the foyer. My father's hand rested on Maddie's shoulder in it. Mine hung loosely at my side. I reached up and turned the frame slightly, just enough to tilt it crooked. Outside, the night was quiet. The streetlights along the road cast pale circles over the pavement. A cool breeze came in from the ocean, carrying the scent of salt and eucalyptus. A taxi slowed near the curb headlights, washing over me. I lifted my hand and the driver rolled down the window. "Airport?" he asked. "Yes," I said. My voice didn't tremble this time. He stepped out to load my suitcase into the trunk. I slid into the back seat, the leather cool against my skin. As the car pulled away, I glanced at the house one last time through the window. Behind those glowing windows were the people I'd spent my entire life trying to please. They looked so ordinary from a distance. No shouting, no chaos, just light and silence. But I knew better. Sometimes escaping isn't about running fast. It's about finally realizing the door was never locked. The fluorescent lights of San Diego International Airport buzzed faintly above me, casting a sterile glow over the terminal. My suitcase rested against my leg, the garment bag with my unused wedding dress folded neatly on top. The dress didn't feel heavy, but the meaning behind it did. Every time I glanced at it, I felt a quiet ache somewhere deep in my chest. I sat near Gate 42, watching travelers move like quiet waves, families with strollers, couples whispering, people hugging goodbye. I was just another traveler, but for once, being anonymous felt like freedom. My ticket said Athens, the first step to Santorini. The destination felt distant and unreal, like a dream I wasn't sure I deserved yet. "Lauren," I turned. Tiffany stood behind me, her blonde hair in a messy bun, still wearing her Pacific Essence travel lanyard from work. She looked out of place in this late-night crowd, holding a paper cup of coffee that had long gone cold. "You came," I said quietly. She shrugged, smiling faintly. "You didn't think I was going to let you run away alone, did you?" "I'm not running away," I said. "I'm finding my way out." Tiffany sat down beside me, crossed her legs, and handed me the coffee. "You've got that look," she said. "The one you get before you make a big decision, like when you quit that job in New York." "This is bigger," I said. "Yeah," she exhaled. "I figured." For a moment we sat in silence, the loudspeaker calling for another flight to Denver. My mind drifted to what my mother was probably doing right now. Calling relatives, spinning her version of events. Maddie posting some cryptic caption like, "Tough day. Pray for my family." I could picture it so clearly that it almost made me laugh. Tiffany broke the quiet. "Does Ethan know you're on your way?" I nodded. "He's already booking the villa." She leaned back, eyes wide. "You're really going through with it. You're going to get married in Greece." I smiled softly. "Some people elope for love. I'm eloping for sanity." Tiffany chuckled, shaking her head. "You always did know how to make an exit." When the boarding announcement came over the speakers, she stood with me. We hugged long and wordless. She whispered, "I won't tell anyone where you're going. Not your mom, not the planner, not a soul." "Thank you," I murmured. As we pulled apart, she gave me a look that was part admiration, part worry. "You're brave, you know that." "I don't feel brave," I said. "I just feel done." She nodded like she understood. Sometimes that's what bravery looks like. The final boarding call echoed. I picked up my things, turned once more to her, and smiled. Take care of them, okay? Or at least, keep them out of my comments section. She laughed softly. Go before I start crying. I walked down the jet bridge, the hum of the engines growing louder with each step. My heart thudded in rhythm with it, fast and uncertain. On the plane, the cabin lights dimmed to a soft blue. I found my seat by the window, buckled in, and rested the garment bag in the empty seat beside me. The couple across the aisle whispered to each other in Spanish, laughing quietly. The sound was comforting. As we taxied toward the runway, I opened my small travel notebook, the same one where I'd written to-do lists, budget notes, catering details. The words, Ocean View Wedding, stared back at me in neat cursive. I hesitated, then drew a line straight through them. Below it, I wrote slowly, deliberately. Santorini ceremony. New beginning. It looked clean. Final. Somewhere over the intercom, the flight attendant's voice came through. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 228 to Athens with a short layover in London. Please fasten your seatbelts. I looked out the window as we ascended, watching San Diego fade into a glittering map of streetlights. The city looked peaceful from this height, too peaceful to contain the wreckage I'd left behind. In that quiet, my mind filled with images from home. My mother standing in the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear. Voice cracking as she said, She's overreacting. Robert, she'll be back. My father pacing near the dining room, muttering, This will blow over if you stop calling everyone. Maddie typing fast on her phone, posting a filtered photo with the caption, Family crisis. Pray for peace. I could almost hear the comments flooding in. Stay strong, Maddie. You're such a good sister. Don't let the haters win. They had always known how to make a tragedy about them. I felt my lips curl into a bitter smile. The woman in the seat next to me glanced over. Everything okay? She asked. Yeah, I said softly. It's the first time I've breathed in years. She smiled kindly the way strangers do when they sense something deeper, but know better than to ask. The plane leveled off above the clouds. The cabin lights dimmed completely now, leaving only the soft hum of engines and the faint glow of screens. I pulled the window shade halfway down and leaned my head against the cool glass. The clouds below looked like snow. The sky above stretched endlessly, black dotted with stars. Somewhere far behind me was a home full of noise and control and guilt. Somewhere ahead of me, a small island waited with sun and salt air, and the promise of starting over. For a moment, fear crept in. The realization that I had no plan beyond landing. No idea how the ceremony would look, or who would stand beside me. But then, I thought of Ethan, and how steady his voice had been on the phone. We'll start our marriage on our own terms. Maybe that was enough. As the plane sped into the night, the engines roared steady and strong. The vibrations carried through the seat, through my body, through everything I was leaving behind. I closed my eyes. I wasn't running anymore. I was rising. The first thing I saw was the light. It wasn't the harsh, dry brightness of California. It was golden liquid, the kind that touched everything and made it feel alive. Santorini was quieter than I'd imagined, like the island itself was holding its breath. The white buildings stacked on the cliffs shimmered against the deep blue of the Aegean. When I stepped out of the car, the wind carried the scent of salt and jasmine. Ethan was waiting at the entrance of the villa, standing in front of the stone archway. He looked like he hadn't slept much either. But when our eyes met, all the exhaustion in both of us seemed to fall away. We didn't say anything for a few seconds, just stood there, the ocean behind him, stretching endlessly into the horizon. You made it, he said, finally, voice soft. I made it. I answered. No turning back now. He smiled, that tired, honest kind of smile that only shows up when you've both survived something you didn't think you could. The villa was simple, built into the side of the cliff, its walls whitewashed and cool to the touch. Tiffany had beaten me there by a few hours. She was stringing white flowers along the railing of the terrace when I arrived. Do you even sleep anymore? I asked, half laughing. She grinned. Not when my best friend decides to rewrite her life on another continent. Inside, the air smelled of lemon and sea breeze. I set my suitcase down in the bedroom, where the sheer curtains billowed against the open balcony doors. My dress hung from the wardrobe, the same one that had waited untouched in my old room in La Jolla. For a moment, I touched the fabric, remembering how it had felt like a symbol of everything that was falling apart. Now it was something different. Something mine. A knock at the door pulled me back. Diane Miller stepped in her tan sharp against the white linen of her dress. My former boss mentor, and the closest thing I'd had to a mother figure who didn't make me feel small. She smiled and handed me a folded piece of fabric. "For you," she said. Something borrowed, something honest. I unfolded it. A handkerchief soft and embroidered with tiny blue vines. It was my grandmother's. She continued. "She used to tell me peace isn't something you stumble upon. You choose it over and over again. Peace." I repeated quietly, running my fingers over the stitching. I'll try to remember that. As the sun lowered toward the water, the terrace transformed into a small ceremony space. The flowers Tiffany had hung glowed pale gold in the light. Ethan stood at the end of the archway, his shirt sleeves rolled up, the wind catching his hair. I walked out in my dress, bare feet against the cool stone, my heart steady in a way it had never been before. There was no music, no crowd, only the sound of the wind and the waves breaking far below. Ethan's voice trembled slightly when he began. "Lauren," he said, eyes locked on mine. "I promise to choose you. Even when it's hard. Even when the world tells us not to. You've spent your life putting others first. Let me be the one who chooses you every single time." The words hit deeper than I expected. For a second, I forgot to breathe. When it was my turn, I looked down at the small piece of paper in my hand, then back at him. Before I could speak, my phone buzzed in the pocket of my dress. It was so quiet I almost didn't notice it. But Tiffany did. She gave me a look, questioning. I hesitated, then pulled the phone out. The screen showed a message from Mom, just one line. "You can still stop this. We forgive you." I stared at it, my thumb hovering over the reply button. There were 100 things I could have said, sarcastic, angry, or desperate. Instead, I pressed the power button and turned the phone off. The silence that followed felt clean. I looked back at Ethan and took a deep breath. "I don't promise to be perfect," I said, my voice carrying softly against the wind, "but I promise never to let anyone else decide my worth again. I promise that wherever we go, it will be our choice, not theirs." He reached for my hand. That's all I've ever wanted. We exchanged rings as the sun touched the edge of the sea, turning everything gold and rose-colored. The metal was warm against my skin. Tiffany sniffed loudly in the background, pretending not to cry. Diane smiled with quiet pride. When Ethan kissed me, the crowd of 4 clapped and laughed, and the island around us seemed to breathe again. After the ceremony, we stayed on the terrace, watching the last light fade. The others went inside to open a bottle of champagne, but I stayed outside leaning on the railing. The ocean stretched endlessly beneath me, the sky turning from gold to indigo. For the first time in years, the silence didn't scare me. It felt like home. My phone vibrated again. I sighed and pulled it from my pocket, expecting maybe Tiffany's photo from inside, or a congratulatory message from Diane. But it was from an unknown number. The message read, "Your family is in trouble back in San Diego." I stared at the words until they blurred. For a moment, I felt that old instinct to panic, to fix things, to call home to make it right. But then I realized that wasn't my job anymore. I set the phone face down on the railing and looked back toward the horizon, where the last sliver of sun disappeared into the sea. "Everything okay?" Ethan asked behind me, stepping close enough that I could feel the warmth of his hand at my back. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Everything's finally okay." He kissed the side of my head. "I can't believe we actually did it." I smiled, watching the waves crash against the rocks below. "Me neither. But it feels right." The sky turned deep violet, and the first stars began to appear. I picked up the phone one last time, looked at the unread message, and smiled faintly. Finally, I whispered more to myself than anyone else. They're facing the truth. The breeze carried the words out toward the water, where they vanished with the sound of the tide. A week later, Tiffany posted the wedding video. It went live at exactly noon on Pacific Essence Travel's social media page under the title, "From Heartbreak to Freedom." The opening shot was me standing barefoot on the terrace wind in my hair. sunlight glinting off the Aegean. Then came Ethan's voiceover, low and warm. Sometimes choosing peace means walking away from everything else. The video was short, just under 2 minutes, but it spread faster than anyone expected. By evening, it had been shared over 10,000 times. Comments flooded in. The most courageous bride of the year. She turned heartbreak into art. This feels like a movie. Tiffany called me that night, her voice bright with excitement. Lauren, you're everywhere. Even a lifestyle magazine reposted it. I laughed softly. I guess people like a happy ending. She hesitated. It's not just that. They love the message. You know, strength after betrayal. The hashtags are wild. Hashtag second chances. Hashtag new beginnings. I smiled faintly, staring out at the Santorini sky streaked with pink and gold. I didn't mean to start a movement. Well, you did, she said, whether you like it or not. What I didn't know was how differently that same video was being watched in San Diego. At my parents' house, the mood was anything but celebratory. Their church friends, once so proud of the Hayes family, were whispering in pews. Women from my mother's charity circle clutched their pearls over brunch, shaking their heads. She married anyway. Alone abroad. After her own family canceled it, how humiliating. My father received an email from his firm's managing partner. We need to discuss the public perception issue regarding your family's situation. This may affect the firm's image. He slammed his laptop shut and muttered under his breath. My mother, standing by the sink, didn't say a word. Maddie, of course, had her own reaction. Sitting cross-legged on her bed, scrolling through the comments, her jaw tightened with every compliment directed at me. She's always been desperate for attention, she told her reflection. Always had to make everything about her. That night, she posted a photo of herself on her own page captioned, "Family drama doesn't define me. Staying strong." The comments were polite but thin. Even her followers seemed to sense the undertone of bitterness. Meanwhile, Ethan and I were settling into the quiet rhythm of married life. Our days were slow and sunlit. Morning coffee on the balcony walks, through the narrow streets, evenings spent cooking together in the tiny villa kitchen. There were moments when I forgot the rest of the world existed. One morning while Ethan was at the market, I opened my laptop and saw my own face on a news site. The headline read, "The bride who was left behind and still said I do." I clicked on it, half curious, half afraid. The article detailed the story from start to finish, quoting an unnamed source close to the family. They described my wedding as a testament to resilience, and my family as a cautionary tale of control and favoritism. There was a line that made me laugh out loud. When her parents canceled her wedding because her sister wasn't in the mood. Lauren Hayes didn't cry. She booked a flight. Ethan walked in a few minutes later with a bag of fruit and 2 coffees. "Why are you laughing?" "I think I've become internet folklore," I said, turning the screen toward him. He glanced at the headline and chuckled. Well, they're not wrong. The phone buzzed again that afternoon, a new message this time from a journalist named Jennifer Hale. She wrote, "I'd love to interview you for an article about resilience and modern womanhood. Your story has inspired so many people." I read it twice before replying simply, "Thank you, but I've said enough already." When I told Tiffany about it later, she sighed. "You could make something huge out of this, you know? A book deal, sponsorship, speaking gigs. I don't want fame," I said quietly. "I just want peace." "Peace doesn't trend," she joked, but I could tell she respected my decision. Days passed and the noise online grew louder, while my mind grew quieter. I stopped checking notifications altogether. Instead, I filled my days with small, ordinary things, helping Diane plan retreats for her travel agency clients, sending postcards to friends back home, learning how to make Greek coffee that was far too strong for me. But at night, the world felt closer again. The villa's stone walls echoed with the sound of the sea. Ethan and I would sit outside on the terrace, wrapped in a blanket. The stars, endless above us. He always asked the same question when the waves were loudest. "Do you regret it?" he said one night, voice low. I thought about the house in La Jolla, the people inside it still pretending everything was fine. I thought about Maddie's smirk the morning she ruined my wedding, about my mother's cold eyes, my father's silence. I shook my head slowly. "No, I don't regret a thing." Ethan brushed his thumb against my hand. "Not even the way it ended." "The way it ended is what let this begin," I said. I finally stopped fighting for their approval. They'll realize one day what they lost. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "And if they don't, I smiled faintly. Then that's their story to live with, not mine. The waves crashed louder below as if agreeing. The air was cool, salted alive. I leaned my head on Ethan's shoulder, watching the horizon where the dark sea met the stars. Somewhere across that ocean, my family was still trying to keep their picture-perfect image intact. But cracks had already formed, and I didn't have to do a thing to make them widen. I didn't need revenge. They were already giving it to themselves. The night breeze carried the faint scent of rosemary from the villa garden. I breathed it in and closed my eyes. I didn't know what would come next, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what came after the storm. 6 weeks after our wedding in Santorini, I got an email from a mutual friend back home with the subject line, "You won't believe what Maddie's doing now." I didn't open it right away. I didn't need to. I could already imagine. Back in San Diego, Maddie had launched her newest project, an online accessories boutique called Maddie Luxe. The logo looked expensive. Sleek gold lettering, a soft blush. Background, a tagline that read, "Luxury that loves you back." Her Instagram feed was a curated fantasy marble countertops. Candles, designer handbags, none of which actually belonged to her. To anyone scrolling, she looked like a self-made woman on the rise, but behind the glossy filters, the truth was less glamorous. The entire operation ran out of her bedroom, a cramped space littered with boxes of knockoff jewelry and plastic wrap. The ring light sat crooked in front of the closet door. Clothes were piled in the corner, makeup smudges stained the carpet. Still, she filmed her business owner morning routines every day at 7 a.m., fake lattes, scripted motivation quotes, and always the same catchphrase, "I built this on my own." In reality, she'd built it on mine. The $42,000 my parents got back from the canceled reception deposits had vanished into her business account. My father had signed the paperwork as guarantor, convinced it was a good entrepreneurial experiment. My mother called it a redemption story. One afternoon, Maddie stood in the living room holding her phone out like a trophy. "Mom, guess what? A major influencer just reached out to me. She wants to feature Maddie Luxe on her page." Margaret looked up from her tablet, eyes shining. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so proud of you. Finally, you're proving what I've always known. You just needed your moment." Robert nodded from his recliner. "Good for you, kiddo. See, hard work pays off." Maddie smirked, pretending humility. "Yeah, hard work." What she didn't mention was that the influencer had messaged her after Maddie offered her a free luxury package and a cut of sales for fake reviews, or that half of her orders were fake generated through burner accounts to inflate numbers. Later that week, she brought Derek home. He was the kind of guy who looked charming from across a bar, tattoo sleeve easy smile. But when he spoke, everything felt just a little too slick. He called my father sir with an exaggerated politeness that bordered on mockery. Over dinner, he leaned back in his chair explaining his genius marketing plan. "Look, the way to get traction online isn't about real sales. It's about perception. You make people believe everyone's buying your stuff, and soon enough they will." Maddie beamed. "See, Derek gets it. Everyone does it." Robert frowned. "You mean fake orders?" Derek laughed, sipping his beer. Not fake, just preemptive enthusiasm. Margaret looked uneasy, but Maddie cut in before she could respond. "Dad, it's totally normal. This is how modern business works." "Don't be so old-fashioned." My father shrugged. "As long as it's legal." Derek grinned. "Everything's legal until someone gets caught." That made Maddie laugh, and the sound was loud and bright. Too loud for such a small kitchen. The next morning, she filmed herself unboxing a shipment of new arrivals. The jewelry sparkled under the ring light, but the metal was thin, the stones glued unevenly. She captioned the post, "Nothing but the best for my girls," followed by a string of hashtags. #BossLife, #LuxuryHustle, #DreamBig. Her followers doubled in 2 weeks. Local bloggers began tagging her store. Orders rolled in, real ones this time, mostly from curious women who believed the illusion. Maddie basked in it, drunk on the attention she'd always craved. But when success came, that fast greed followed faster. Derek pushed her to reinvest everything into more ads, more product, more fake buzz. Bigger is better. "Babe," he said, "let's show them you're the next big name." They hosted giveaways that never shipped prizes, copied designs from other small shops, and started running late on deliveries. Complaints trickled into her email, but Maddie brushed them off. "People love to hate when they're jealous," she said, deleting another 1-star review. She filmed another video that night pretending to pack orders at midnight. "Sometimes I work till I drop," she said to the camera, smiling through fake exhaustion. In the background, Derek scrolled through his phone, smirking. Meanwhile, back at my parents' house, the tension grew. Bills were piling up, my father's firm had cut his bonuses, and my mother was quietly dipping into their savings to help Maddie through a slow month. When a thick envelope arrived one morning, neither of them expected it to change everything. Robert opened it at the kitchen table, still in his robe, a cup of black coffee steaming beside him. The return address read, "Department of Financial Investigations, U. Treasury." He frowned, pulling out the document inside. Lines of dense text, official seals. The words "suspicious financial activity" and "digital commerce audit" stood out in bold. Margaret entered just as his hand began to shake slightly. "What's that?" "Some kind of mistake," he muttered. "A routine check, maybe." She took the letter, scanning the first paragraph. "Robert, this isn't routine. They're reviewing Maddie's business accounts. It says her merchant IDs are linked to personal transfers from our savings account." He looked up, eyes narrowing. "That can't be right." "She used your signature on the guarantor form," Margaret whispered, color draining from her face. He rubbed his temples. "God, I told her not to mix personal funds." Margaret clutched the counter for balance. "What if it's not a mistake?" He didn't answer. In that moment, the kitchen, the same one where I'd eaten breakfast every morning for years, was filled with silence thick enough to choke on. And somewhere across the world, in the calm of Santorini, I sat on the terrace of our villa sipping coffee as the sea glowed silver in the morning light. I didn't know any of it yet, but part of me sensed the ripple. I had spent so long trying to protect them, clean up after them, explain them. But they didn't need my help to fall apart. They were doing it perfectly on their own. The morning light over Santorini was softer than usual, the kind that wrapped everything in gold before the heat arrived. I sat at the small desk by the window in our villa, the sea stretching endlessly ahead of me. Ethan had already gone out for groceries, leaving behind the smell of coffee and his half-folded newspaper. I opened my laptop, scanning through emails from Diane about upcoming projects for Pacific Essence Travel. Then, at the top of the inbox, a new message appeared. From Diane herself, marked urgent. I clicked it open, expecting something about client schedules or invoices, but the first line made my stomach tighten. "Lauren, I thought you should hear it from me before you see it elsewhere. The Hayes firm is under investigation. Federal auditors are tracing large transfers from your father's company accounts into Maddie's online business. It looks bad." I read it twice, my heart steady but cold. The words seemed to echo against the quiet of the room. Karma doesn't come early, I thought, but it never misses its appointment. Outside, the ocean glittered like nothing had changed. Inside, I sat, frozen fingers still on the keyboard. A strange calm spread through me. Not relief, not revenge, but something quieter. Acceptance. My phone buzzed. Tiffany's name flashed across the screen. "Hey," she said before I could speak. "Have you seen the news? I just read Diane's email." I said, "It's everywhere," she continued. "Local business outlets, even a financial blog picked it up. Your dad's firm, the Maddie Lux store. They're saying the funds were mixed, and investigators are tracing connections." I leaned back in the chair, and Tiffany hesitated. "She's live right now, saying she's the victim of a smear campaign, that someone's jealous of her success." "Of course she is," Tiffany said softly. "What are you going to do?" "Nothing. I looked out at the waves, sunlight flickering across the surface. The truth doesn't need my help. It's doing fine on its own. Back in San Diego, the picture wasn't nearly as peaceful. My father sat in his office at home, face pale, as he deleted file after file, his hands shaking just slightly. Margaret stood by the kitchen window, phone pressed to her ear, whispering to someone from church. "It's a misunderstanding," she said over and over. Robert would never allow anything illegal. Maddie, meanwhile, had turned her crisis into content. The phone balanced on a ring light. She faced the camera with glassy eyes and trembling lips. "I'm being targeted," she said to her followers. "There are people out there who can't stand to see a woman succeed, but I won't stop building my dream." The comments flooded in, half sympathetic, half skeptical. "Stay strong, Queen. Something feels off. Didn't her dad's firm just get flagged for financial issues?" But Maddie didn't read the doubts. She never had the patience for reality. That afternoon, Tiffany showed up at our villa, her sunglasses still on as she walked through the open door. "You look like someone who's just watched her enemies implode," she said dryly. I smiled faintly. I don't have enemies, just people who taught me what not to become. She sat across from me, kicking off her sandals. You know you could say something. A statement, maybe. You're the calm one in this family. People would believe your version. No, I said. This isn't my story to narrate anymore. Tiffany studied me for a long moment, then nodded. You really are done with them. I was done the moment they canceled my wedding. Everything after that was just proof. Later that evening, Ethan came home with groceries. He set down a bag of peaches and leaned against the counter. You've been quiet, he said. News travels fast, I replied, even across oceans. He gave a small, careful nod. Are you thinking about going back? I shook my head. If they need me, it's not for anything good. They never needed me for the good things. Maybe they'll reach out. They might, I said, staring out at the fading light. But this time, they'll have to face it without me. That night, the wind was stronger than usual. We sat outside on the terrace, wrapped in a thin blanket, the smell of grilled fish drifting from the nearby houses. The stars hung low and clear. Do you think they'll actually be charged? Ethan asked quietly. Probably. I said, you can't build a life on lies and expect it to hold forever. He glanced at me. You sound almost sad. I am, I admitted. Not for them. For the years I wasted trying to make them proud. For the girl who kept hoping that if she just loved harder, they'd finally love her back. Ethan reached over and took my hand. You don't have to be her anymore. I know, I whispered. But sometimes she still shows up. He didn't respond, just pulled me closer. The sea murmured below, relentless and ancient. The next morning, the television in the villa's common room was tuned to an English-language news channel. I wasn't planning to watch, but when the anchor mentioned my last name, I froze. Breaking story out of San Diego, the woman said. The Hayes family, long admired for their philanthropic involvement, is now under federal investigation for financial misconduct. Sources claim that large sums were funneled through an online retail business owned by their younger daughter, Madison Hayes. Investigators are reviewing whether the transfers violated tax or laundering laws. The screen shifted to show a photo of my parents from some old charity event, smiling glamorous, the perfect couple. Then one of Maddie posing with her coffee mug and ring light. The caption read, America's picture-perfect family under scrutiny. I turned the TV off. The silence that followed was deafening. For years I'd imagined what justice might look like. I thought it would feel triumphant, maybe even sweet. But watching it unfold from thousands of miles away felt strangely hollow. I'd wanted them to understand my pain. Now I just hoped they understood their own. Later that afternoon, far across the ocean, in a fluorescent-lit office in San Diego, a man in a gray suit flipped open a thick case file labeled Hayes. Detective Marcus Reed studied the documents in silence for a moment before turning to his junior officer. When people think they're above the law, he said, tapping the folder. That's when the law comes knocking. Outside the station, the California sun blazed bright and unbothered, as if it had no idea what kind of storm was about to begin. In the Financial Crimes Division of the San Diego Police Department, the air smelled faintly of burnt coffee and paper. Detective Marcus Reed leaned over his monitor, the bluish glow of the screen reflecting off his glasses. Rows of numbers scrolled past, transaction logs, account IDs, routing histories. On the second screen, two graphs overlapped, like tangled veins. One marked Hayes Law Group, the other, Maddie Lux, LLC. See that, Reed said, pointing at the timestamps. Same-day transfers, same IP address. He moves firm funds into her business. She withdraws them as vendor expenses. It's textbook laundering. His junior officer, a woman named Ortiz, frowned. They really thought no one would notice she registered the LLC under her own name. Reed smirked. That's the problem with amateurs. They think visibility equals legitimacy. He clicked through another folder, pulling up photos from Maddie's social media. Lavish product launches, luxury trips, brand partnerships, all posted within weeks of the transactions. Ortiz shook her head. It's like she was begging to get caught. Or Reed said she thought the family name made her untouchable. Later that afternoon, officers moved in. Derek was the first to fall. They found him at a strip mall parking lot, leaning against his car, vape pen in hand. When the cruiser lights flashed behind him, he dropped it hands up. At the station, under the harsh fluorescent lights, he cracked within minutes. It wasn't my idea, he stammered. She said it was all about building credibility. Fake orders, fake reviews, fake success. I just did what she told me. She said her dad's firm was backing her, so it was fine. Reed exchanged a look with Ortiz, so she knew about the firm transfers. Derek nodded, rubbing his hands together. Of course she knew. She told me her dad would cover it up if anyone asked. Said he's been cleaning up her messes since high school. Back in the Hayes neighborhood, the cul-de-sac was unusually quiet. When 2 black SUVs pulled up outside the white colonial house, neighbors peeked through their blinds. Robert answered the door in his button-down shirt and khakis, as if dressed for a board meeting. "Can I help you?" Detective Reed stepped forward, Sag visible. Robert Hayes. "Yes. I'm Detective Reed with the Financial Crimes Division. We have a warrant to search the premises for records related to your daughter's business, Maddie Lux, LLC. Robert's voice went sharp. "This is absurd. You can't just come in here without—" Reed held up the paper. Signed by Judge Morales this morning." Behind him, Margaret appeared, her hair undone, eyes wide. "There must be a mistake," she whispered. "My husband's a lawyer. He would never—" Reed's expression didn't change. "Ma'am, please step aside." The officers entered. The sound of drawers opening, the rustle of files, the metallic click of evidence bags. All filled the house. Upstairs, Maddie stormed out of her room in leggings and an oversized sweatshirt. Her phone clutched in her hand. "What the hell is going on?" she shouted. Reed turned to her calmly. "Miss Hayes, we have a warrant for all devices used to conduct business for Maddie Lux. This is my home, you can't take my stuff." "Actually," he said, "we can." She clutched her laptop to her chest. "This is invasion of privacy, ma'am. Put the device down. Over my dead body." 2 officers moved forward. One reached for the laptop. Maddie pulled back, shouting as if the walls could protect her. "You're ruining my business. Do you have any idea who my father is?" Robert, standing in the hallway, looked smaller than I'd ever imagined him. "Maddie," he said quietly. "Just let them do their job." She froze, her mouth open in disbelief. "You're letting them take everything." "Enough," he said, but his voice cracked. Margaret began to cry. Reed handed the laptop to Ortiz and gave a short nod. "Bag it." For a few seconds, no one spoke. The only sound was the distant whir of the air conditioner and the scratching of pens on evidence forms. Then Maddie whispered, "This isn't fair. I didn't do anything wrong." Reed turned to her. "Miss Hayes, people always say that, right before we show them the bank records." That evening, footage from the raid made its way onto the evening news. The segment began with an aerial shot of the Hayes residence. Law enforcement vehicles lined up outside reporters on the lawn. The anchor's voice was calm, almost sympathetic. The once prominent Hayes family, known for their involvement in community philanthropy, is now under investigation for financial misconduct linked to their daughter's online retail business. From my villa in Santorini, I watched it all on the muted TV screen. The sunlight had faded, leaving the sea dark and endless beyond the glass doors. Ethan sat beside me, a half-empty glass of wine in his hand. On screen, the camera cut to footage of Maddie being escorted from the house, her face, pale eyes darting between cameras. For once, she didn't smile. The caption read, "Local entrepreneur under investigation for fraud." Ethan exhaled. Jesus. I didn't answer right away. My reflection stared back from the screen. Me, calm and distant, watching the fallout of a life I'd already left behind. He turned to me. "How do you feel?" I thought about it then said. "Peaceful. For the first time, justice doesn't need my permission." He nodded, his fingers brushing mine. "They'll survive." "Maybe," I said. "But they'll never be the same." The segment cut to a still photo of Maddie, the one from her About Me page on her website. She was smiling, head-tilted, confidence radiating. Then, as if the universe had a sense of irony, the image dissolved into the mugshot taken that afternoon. Same face, same hair, but the eyes were different. Empty. I leaned back on the couch, the sound of the sea filling the room. I hadn't wanted them to hurt. I just wanted them to stop pretending that they never could. The last thing I saw before turning off the TV was Detective Reed stepping out of the house, a folder tucked under his arm. His expression unreadable. The anchor's voice faded into the background. "When you build a life on lies, the collapse isn't an accident, it's an inevitability." And there, for the first time in years, I believed it. 3 weeks passed before the story stopped being breaking news and became a scandal. The kind that people whispered about in grocery aisles and pretended not to read on their phones. In San Diego, my father's name was now shorthand for hypocrisy. Robert Hayes, partner at Hayes & Larkin Law Group, received the email on a gray Monday morning. It was short, brutally polite. Effective immediately, your role as senior partner is suspended pending the outcome of the investigation. The firm's reputation has been significantly compromised. He didn't tell anyone about it. But when he didn't show up at work, the calls started. By noon, every associate in the office knew. By evening, the legal community of San Diego had turned his name into a cautionary tale. At home, my mother received her own kind of punishment. A letter from the La Jolla Women's Alliance arrived in a crisp, white envelope. The first line read, "Due to the ongoing public matter, your membership will be placed on indefinite hold until further notice." Margaret sat in her car outside the community center for nearly an hour before going inside to remove her nameplate. The room was empty, the faint smell of coffee and old carpet in the air. Her hands trembled as she pried the small brass plaque from the wall. Margaret Hayes, events chair. She stared at it a moment, then dropped it into her purse. For the first time in her life, there was no one left to perform for. They had built their world like a fortress, layers of charm, wealth, and social standing meant to keep judgment out. But the truth has a way of slipping through cracks. The wall they built from lies had finally fallen brick by brick, until nothing stood between them and the reality they'd created. Online, the collapse spread like wildfire. The video of Maddie being led out of her home in handcuffs had been uploaded by a bystander. Within hours, it was everywhere. TikTok, Reddit morning news segments. The hashtag Fake Queen trended for 2 days. Comment sections were filled with brutal jokes and armchair psychology. This is what happens when you grow up spoiled. Money can't buy morals. Where's her sister now? The last comment was one I saw more than once. I didn't respond. The first call came at 3:17 p.m. My phone buzzed on the table beside me. I saw her name, Maddie, and let it ring. Then another, and another. Finally, a text appeared. "Please, Lauren, pick up. I didn't mean for it to get this bad." Then another. "You don't understand. They're making it look worse than it is. I just wanted them to take me seriously." And the last one, almost unreadable through the typos. "I need you. You're my sister." I stared at the messages for a long time before setting the phone down and walking outside. The sky over Santorini was a deep, perfect blue. The waves rolled against the cliffs below the villa, steady and indifferent. Ethan was sitting at the table on the terrace, sketching something in his notebook. "You okay?" he asked, looking up. "Yeah," I said, though my voice was quieter than usual. "I just needed air." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. He didn't push. He never did. As I stood there, the memories began to surface. Small, cutting pieces of the past that fit together like glass shards. I saw myself at 16, standing in the kitchen holding a letter from my guidance counselor about a scholarship nomination. My father hadn't even looked up from his paper. "You're too sensitive for law school," he'd said. "This world eats people like you alive." He was right about one thing. It had eaten me once, but I'd learned how to stop letting them feed me to it. Later that week, a new email arrived. This time from Jennifer Hale, the journalist who had reached out before. "Lauren, I'm in Santorini on assignment. I'd love to meet you for a short interview. It's not about the scandal. It's about resilience. I think your story matters." I almost deleted it, but something in her tone, her restraint, made me hesitate. That afternoon, she came to the villa with a small camera crew and a gentle smile. She was younger than I'd expected, but her eyes carried the calm focus of someone who'd seen too many human messes up close. We sat outside on the terrace again, the same spot where Ethan and I had married, under the sunset, weeks earlier. Now the light was the same, the kind that makes the sea turn to molten gold. Jennifer adjusted her recorder. "Lauren, I know this isn't easy, but people see you as a symbol now, someone who found peace after betrayal. How do you see yourself?" I thought about the question for a moment, then said, "Not a symbol, just someone who finally got tired of being quiet." She smiled. "And what do you want people to take from that?" "That silence isn't always noble," I said. "Sometimes it's just another way of letting people hurt you. I didn't leave to get revenge. I left because I was done suffering for other people's comfort." Jennifer nodded slowly. "That's powerful." "It's just the truth," I said. "I didn't destroy anything. They did that themselves. I just stopped standing in the way." The interview lasted maybe 20 minutes. When it ended, she thanked me and promised to handle it respectfully. That night after dinner, Ethan and I sat on the same terrace, watching the first stars appear. He handed me his phone, where Jennifer's post had already gone viral. The video that showed me speaking under the sunset, the caption, "Simple. Some stories don't need revenge. Only peace." I read the comments, 1,000 voices echoing the same sentiment. Women saying they'd left toxic families, marriages, jobs. Men saying they recognized themselves in the people I'd left behind. For once, the internet wasn't cruel. Ethan looked over, his expression soft. "You okay seeing it out there?" I smiled faintly. "It's strange. All my life I wanted them to hear me. Now strangers do instead. And that bothers you?" I shook my head. No, maybe that's what freedom sounds like. We sat there in the quiet for a long time, the sea whispering below the world, slowly rewriting the story I thought would always belong to them. 6 months later, summer settled over San Diego like nothing bad could ever happen there. The morning light slid through the blinds of the Hayes house, the kind of quiet, warm light that made the world look deceptively peaceful. The neighborhood was still half asleep. Sprinklers hissed softly across manicured lawns, and a dog barked somewhere down the street. Inside, the family sat around the kitchen table. Margaret sipped her coffee in silence, her eyes red from another sleepless night. Robert read the paper, though he hadn't turned a page in 10 minutes. The air between them was heavy, stagnant. Maddie shuffled in wearing a robe, her hair matted, her face pale from weeks of anxiety and anger. "Anything?" she asked, her voice rough. Robert didn't look up. "Nothing yet. They said the case was stalled." Margaret added quickly, as if saying it out loud could make it true. Maddie sank into a chair. "Good. Maybe they realized they've got nothing." But before her words could settle, 3 sharp knocks broke the morning. Robert froze. Margaret's cup clattered against the saucer. The sound came again, steady, deliberate. "Who is that?" Maddie asked, eyes wide. Margaret hesitated, then rose and walked to the door. Through the frosted glass, she could make out dark silhouettes, 3 figures still and waiting. When she opened it, the sunlight spilled over a man in a gray suit, his badge held clearly in front of him. "Mrs. Hayes," said Detective Marcus Reed, calm as ever. "We have a warrant to search the premises." Margaret's throat went dry. "There must be some mistake." "I'm afraid not, ma'am." He gestured toward the officers behind him. "Please, step aside." By then, Robert had appeared in the hallway. "This is absurd," he snapped. "You can't just barge in without—" Reed handed him a folded document, signed by Judge Morales this morning. "Search and seizure of property related to commercial fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering." Robert's face drained of color. "I'm an attorney. I know my rights. You can exercise them," Reed said evenly after we're done here. The officers entered, their footsteps echoing through the house. One headed straight for the study, another to the upstairs hallway. The sound of drawers opening, papers rustling, the metallic click of evidence bags filled the air. Maddie appeared at the top of the stairs, clutching her phone. "What's going on?" Reed looked up at her. "Miss Hayes, you're listed in the warrant. We'll need access to all devices related to your business, my business." "You mean Maddie Lux? You can't just take my stuff." "It's evidence," Reed replied. "Please cooperate." Maddie came down the stairs, her voice rising with each step. "You people don't know what you're doing. Those sales were legitimate. My followers adore me." Robert tried to intercept her. "Madison, let them." "No," she shouted. "You said you'd handle this, Dad. You said nothing would happen." He flinched, the words cutting sharper than he expected. "I'm trying," he said. But it came out weak, desperate. 2 officers moved toward Maddie's laptop on the kitchen counter. When one reached for it, she lunged, clutching it to her chest. "This is mine. You have no right." Reed nodded to his team. "Restrain if necessary." One officer gently but firmly took her arm. "Ma'am, don't make this harder than it has to be." She pulled back, her voice cracking. "You're ruining my life." Margaret stepped forward, tears streaking her face. "Please don't take her. She didn't mean to do anything wrong." Reed didn't look at her. "Intent doesn't erase evidence, ma'am." The kitchen became a blur of movement. Camera flashes murmured orders, bags being sealed. Robert stood frozen near the table, his reputation collapsing in real time. Margaret sobbed quietly into her hands. Maddie, pale and shaking, stared at the officers carrying out her laptop, her phone stacks of paperwork. When Reed finally turned back toward the door, his tone was formal, but almost kind. "You'll receive a detailed inventory of everything collected. You can contact your attorney after we leave." Robert's voice was hoarse. "I am an attorney." Reed paused. "Then you know how this works." The front door closed behind them, but the sound lingered. From the street, the scene unfolded in slow motion. Cameras rolling, neighbors standing at the edge of their driveways, pretending not to stare. A reporter's voice carried over the soft hum of the morning. The Hayes family, once prominent figures in San Diego's social circles, faced another legal blow today, as investigators executed a warrant connected to ongoing financial misconduct charges. Margaret crumpled onto the couch, her hands trembling. Maddie stood by the window watching the police vehicles pull away, her reflection warped in the glass. For the first time, she didn't look angry, just lost. That same afternoon across the world, I was sitting in the living room of our villa in Santorini. The ocean spread endlessly beyond the open balcony. The television was muted, playing an English-language news channel. Ethan was reading beside me, his glasses slipping down his nose. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from Jennifer Hale. "They've been arrested. Thought you'd want to know." I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the screen, then set the phone down without replying. Ethan looked up. "Bad news." I shook my head. "No, just inevitable news." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Do you want to talk about it?" "Not really." I said, "It's strange. I used to think I'd feel satisfied when this day came, and now I just feel quiet." Outside, the waves crashed against the cliffs with a steady rhythm. The sky was so bright it almost hurt to look at. I walked out onto the terrace, the sunlight warm on my skin, and placed a hand over my heart. Not because it hurt, but because for the first time it didn't. Somewhere far away, the world was finally giving them what they'd always avoided: consequences. The sea shimmered below, endless and calm, as if it had been waiting for this silence too. 2 weeks after the arrest, I was back in Los Angeles, standing in the new office of Pacific Essence Travel. The space still smelled faintly of paint and fresh paper. My desk faced a wall of glass overlooking downtown, sunlight flashing off car roofs, the hum of life moving steadily forward. It was a Tuesday, the kind of ordinary day I'd once dreamed about. No family drama, no headlines, just work and quiet. Around noon, I returned from a meeting to find a plain brown envelope on my desk. There was no return address, just handwriting I knew immediately, neat cursive, too careful to be anyone else's. Margaret Hayes. For a long time, I just looked at it. The paper felt heavy between my fingers, heavier than the envelope itself should have been. Finally, I sat down and opened it. The sound of tearing paper echoed louder than I expected in the quiet room. Inside was a single sheet of lined stationery folded twice. I unfolded it slowly, and my mother's voice filled my head as my eyes traced the words. "My dearest Lauren, I don't expect you to answer this. I only need to say what I should have said years ago. I was wrong. I thought I was protecting your sister. I called it love, but it wasn't. It was fear. Fear that she would fall apart. Fear that people would see how broken she truly was. I let that fear dictate every choice, and in the process, I broke something in you instead. When I watched you walk out that day in your robe, your hair half done for the wedding, I told myself you were overreacting, that you'd come back, but when you didn't, I realized something I never wanted to face. You were the only one strong enough to leave. Your father and I have paid for our mistakes in ways I couldn't have imagined. The house is quiet now. Too quiet. Your father doesn't sleep. I still hear Maddie crying at night from her old room, even though she's gone. Sometimes I think I hear your voice instead, calling from the kitchen, asking if I need help with dinner. I'm sorry for every time I chose silence over standing up for you. I'm sorry I let you believe you were the problem. You weren't. You were the only one who ever saw the truth for what it was. If peace is what you've found, please hold on to it. Don't come back into this storm, even for me. I hope you have love and laughter and mornings that don't hurt. You deserve the kind of happiness I was too afraid to reach for. With love, Mom. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but I didn't. Instead, I sat back in my chair and looked out through the window at the sun hanging high over Los Angeles. I felt lighter. For so long, I'd carried around the weight of wanting an apology that never came. And now that it had, it didn't feel like justice or vindication. It just felt like release. I folded the letter carefully, smoothing the creases with my palm. On my desk sat a photo frame, a candid shot from our Santorini wedding, Ethan and I laughing, the sea in the background. I opened the back and slipped the letter behind the photo, pressing it flat. A reflection of us caught the sunlight. It shimmered across the glass, merging my mother's words with our smiles. Ethan walked in a few minutes later, holding a takeaway coffee in one hand and his jacket draped over his arm. "Hey," he said, "you look like you're thinking too hard. Maybe I am," I said, leaning back. He set the coffee on my desk. "You okay?" I hesitated before answering. "Yeah, I just got a letter from your family, from my mother." He studied my face for a moment, then asked, "Do you want to talk about it?" "Not really," I said softly. "It was kind, honest, even. But it doesn't change anything." He walked around the desk, placing a hand gently on my shoulder. "You don't owe anyone more pain just because they finally feel it too." I nodded, the words settling inside me. "I know. Forgiveness isn't about going back. It's just about putting the story down." We stood there in silence for a moment, sunlight catching in the glass and spilling across the floor. He squeezed my shoulder. "You're doing okay, you know." I smiled faintly. For once, I actually believed that. After he left, I sat for a while listening to the hum of the city through the window. The letter lay hidden behind the photograph, but I could still feel it there like a small heartbeat in the background of my new life. The rest of the office buzzed quietly outside my door, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, normal sounds of people moving forward. I turned the frame toward the light again. In the reflection, I could almost see her. My mother, the woman who had built her identity on control, finally admitting she was wrong. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger, just hope that she'd learn what I had learned, that love isn't control, and silence isn't peace. Before leaving for the day, I whispered to the empty office, "Mom, I hope you find your own freedom someday." I switched off the desk lamp, the light fading from the letter's edge, and closed the door behind me. A year passed faster than I expected. Los Angeles mornings had their own rhythm, sunlight bouncing off glass towers, the hum of traffic, the scent of coffee drifting through open doors. I had grown to love the sound of the city, waking up the steady noise of people with somewhere to be. Every morning when I stepped into the Pacific Essence travel office, I felt a quiet kind of pride. Not the loud, performative pride my parents had always chased, but the kind that came from building something small, solid, and entirely mine. The lobby smelled like citrus and new beginnings. I walked in wearing a white suit, my team greeting me with easy smiles. "Morning, Lauren." "Hey, boss." Their energy felt light, unforced. I'd learned to create a space where no one had to pretend to be perfect. That alone felt like a small revolution. As I set my coffee on the desk, my assistant poked her head in. "The feature went live this morning," she said, grinning. "You're trending again." I opened my laptop, and there it was on the homepage, "The Wedding That Changed Everything." The documentary Jennifer Hale had been working on for nearly a year. The thumbnail was a still from our interview in Santorini. Me laughing mid-sentence, wind in my hair, the sea behind me. I clicked play. The narration was calm, almost reverent. One decision changed her life. When her family canceled her wedding, Lauren Hayes chose not to collapse, but to begin again. Clips followed. Our ceremony under the Santorini sun, waves rolling below the terrace. The handwritten vows. Ethan's smile. Then, newer footage, me leading a travel retreat for women who had left broken marriages, showing them the same cliffs, the same view that had once saved me. Comments flooded the screen faster than I could read them. Her story helped me walk away from my toxic marriage. I watched this and realized I wasn't crazy for wanting peace. She turned pain into something powerful. Hundreds of messages filled my inbox, too. Women from all over the world wrote to me, some in long paragraphs, some in single sentences. "Thank you for showing us that we can start over. You made me believe I deserve happiness again." I sat back, letting the words wash over me. I used to think happiness was something you chased. Now I knew it was something you allowed yourself to keep. I didn't need their approval or forgiveness or validation. I just needed to keep choosing the version of myself that felt free. That afternoon, Ethan met me outside the office, car keys dangling from his hand. "Pack light," he said, grinning. "I have a surprise." We drove along the coast until the city faded behind us, replaced by the endless Pacific. The air smelled like salt and sun. "You're terrible at keeping secrets," I said, smiling. He laughed. "Then you already know where we're going." I did. The flight landed the next morning. Santorini looked the same, but I wasn't. The island greeted us with sunlight spilling over the cliffs, white walls gleaming against blue water. It was exactly 1 year since the day I'd said I do under that same sky. The villa owner recognized us immediately. "Back for your anniversary," she said warmly, pressing my hand between hers. "You two brought good luck to this place." That evening, we set up dinner on the terrace. Simple, perfect. A table for two, a bottle of wine, the air soft with the scent of lemon trees. The horizon glowed orange and pink as the sun began to fall. Ethan poured me a glass and smiled across the table. 1 year, he said. "You know it feels like 10. I laughed. "Is that a good thing?" "The best," he said. "You've been the calm after every storm." I tilted my head, thinking, funny, I used to think I was the storm. He reached across the table, tracing my hand with his thumb. "You were never the storm, Lauren. You were just trying to survive one." We sat quietly after that, watching the sun dip lower. The sea shimmered gold, just like it had that first evening. After dinner, I walked to the edge of the terrace, holding a small velvet box I'd carried all the way from Los Angeles. Inside were 2 wedding rings, the ones that had been meant for the ceremony my parents canceled. I hadn't looked at them in over a year. Ethan joined me, standing close enough that I could feel his warmth. "You're sure?" he asked gently. I nodded. "I don't need them anymore. They belong to a story that ended," he smiled. "Then let's give them back to the sea." I opened the box. The rings caught the fading light, reflecting streaks of orange and silver. For a moment, I remembered everything. The shouting, the betrayal, the way I'd walked out of that house with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart. And then I let them fall. They disappeared soundlessly into the waves below, swallowed by the water that had witnessed both my ending and my beginning. "They canceled my wedding," I said quietly, watching the ripples fade. "But I turned it into my first chapter." Ethan slipped his arm around me. "You did more than that," he whispered. "You rewrote the ending." The last of the sunlight faded from the sky, leaving only a soft glow over the water. I could hear laughter from a distant villa, the faint sound of music drifting through the night air. It all felt full circle, peaceful, earned. As the wind brushed against my face, I thought of my mother's letter, of all the women who'd written to me, of the years I'd spent trying to earn love that was never meant to be conditional. I smiled, whispering to the sea. Some endings are just beginnings in disguise. The water shimmered in response, as if it understood. If you've ever been told you weren't enough, or that your dreams were too much, remember this. No one else gets to write your story for you. You can always start over. You can always begin again.